calls.
Rangers are out of it.
Jamie,
Yeah.
my son's taking Spanish
Do something.
and he was on the fence about whether or not next year.
All right, well, now I'll
So
call
random.
meeting to order, meeting of town council, city clerk of North Carolina Development. June 13th, 2022, the time is 5:30. All members of the council are accounted for. Councilor Rock has been excused. I will now take approval of the minutes of the May 12th, 2022 Finance and Community Development Committee meeting. Motion by Councilor Canales, second. Councilor Gibbs, any changes, alterations, or deletions? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, carried. Item 2.1, draft resolution authorizing revising capital project H5110.83 2022 equipment purchase. Motion, Councilor Gibbs, second by Councilor Canales. Discussion.
Well, I just said one,
Yeah.
are those building inspector vehicles and truck tracking, are they gonna be bonded or?
Truck tracking GPS is coming out of the general fund, it looks like. None of them are bonded, so all of the items on the bottom are the funding sources for these. So none of these items are bonded. They're either paid for chips, general fund, or maybe some are bonded from the general fund, right? Some of these high equipment or the high dollar value.
17,660 acres do be added to the ban or bonding review.
Great, thank you. The change to this is that there was one piece of equipment that became unavailable. That reduced the total amount of equipment and attachments down by 11,000. Is that right? Something like that?
It reduced it down.
I guess the point is it reduced the equipment attachment down. But then there was another piece of equipment needed for GPS piece of equipment for directional drilling needed for city work. That was then added back. The cost is split between water, sewer, and general fund, which is a general fund increase of about 18,000 or so. That looks like 18. No, I'm sorry, not 18,000, 2,000. 2,000 per year to the general fund. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Item 3.1, draft resolution establishment of management policies and fees for the downtown area parking system. Motion by Councilor Canales, second. Councilor Kelly, discussion. As was the discussion last time, there was some concerns expressed over the fee structure. The request was to have Matt Miller go back and revise the fee structure to make it a little bit more acceptable. What resulted overall, what resulted is a $90 semi-annual permit rather than a $90 quarterly permit. So it goes from that quarterly permit was only for 3 months for $90. Now it's for 6 months for the $90. And then it went from a 300 and 24 memory here. I want to say $321 annual permit to a $171 annual permit. So not half, but a significant discount on the annual permit. So that is the fundamental change to this. What that does do, resulting in the income, is it reduces the overall income by about $50,000 or so to the pricing, to the funding model for this downtown.
I'm glad to see the reductions. And I also think just the public needs to just be made more aware of when they can park for free, which is after 4 o'clock and on weekends and holidays. A lot of people aren't realizing this yet that go to downtown businesses. So we want to make sure that everybody knows you can park for free after 4 o'clock. If you're going down to have dinner, you can park for free on a Saturday night. You can park for free on a Sunday. Just there are ways to not have to pay to park in this downtown area.
Yeah, and it, you know, like It's just like the surface parking, and the only thing that really changes here is long-term parking, parking lot parking, and the fees that are incurred for the long-term parking aspect of this. 2-hour parking remains the same. It has been free, will continue to be free. There's a time limit on 2-hour parking, as there has been over the last, I don't know how many years. If anything, we standardized 2-hour parking for all of downtown, rather than have half an hour on one side of the street, an hour and a half on the same side, on the same street on the other side, which has just caused a lot of confusion in general. So, and we're not charging for street parking. That is not a factor here. I actually, and I say that because I had a conversation with a business owner who said, well, my customers aren't gonna wanna come to my business because they're gonna charge for parking. I was like, well, they're not, it's the same as it is now. 2 hours on the streets for free, will remain free. And, you know, if you want to say it out loud, people will find out, and it's not rocket science. If you want to game the system, you can park there at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and not get a ticket. So it's, you know, it's a good balance between what was initially proposed and what's now currently proposed. And then the other thing is, I know that this is a sensitive topic, and I'm not trying to beat a dead horse here, but the system's flexible. So when we do see large construction projects downtown, we can turn the system off. When we see parking bans for snow emergencies, we can turn the system off. And that's the flexibility of the system. And I think what I see in the council, and what hopefully the public sees as well, is the flexibility that we have, and that we're willing to be flexible in this whole process and understanding concerns.
And also, I can think of one business that is actually changing their hours so that their employees and their patrons will not be affected by this.
Any further discussion? Roll call to add this to the regular agenda.
Counselor Canales?
Yes.
Counselor Kelly?
Yes.
Counselor Gibbs?
Yes.
Counselor Talon?
Yes.
Counselor Moore?
Yes.
Carried. 3.2, draft resolution authorizing and revising capital project H5110.87-2022 downtown improvements. Motion, Councilor Canales. Second. Councilor Kelly, discussion. I did send out a memo fairly, I think it was either late Sunday or today, just as an overview. It's not part of this conversation here. But the memo was outlining essentially the process that the city saw when we transitioned the farmer's market from its Third District location to the Green Street location. And essentially what it outlined was some of the thinking, some of the process, the conversation for how decisions were made to enhance and improve the farmer's market in its current location. A lot of the concern we've heard of Councilor Gibbs and other folks is that, you know, we haven't done enough for the farmer's market. I think that when we look back at the history of how we've made these decisions and where we're at today, it's probably been a little more cautious in terms of spending as well as approach to that investment. Not to say that the farmer's market isn't valuable or we don't see value in investing in those dollars, but I think there was more of a concern about putting the cart before the horse, if you will, and not really knowing how much money we were going to be able to spend on these improvements, as well as how well received the market was going to be in that new location. Pointing out that the funding model or the funding stream from this did come from overages, but leftover funding from DRI when some of those projects were not adopted or when they were really pushed back to the city. Some of that funding from those other projects were filtered into the farmer's market. The unfortunate part is outlined in that memo was that there was a very comprehensive list of improvements, including permanent bathrooms, facade replacements and improvements that were slated for that initial project, but were rolled back because of those two primary concerns. Now, when we look at some of the I don't know if it's called patchwork, but it doesn't, may not go as far as like a phase 2 of the farmer's market, which is something that was proposed last year, to move into more of a enhanced development phase, similar to phase 1, but moving the farmer's market again forward. I do recall some of the conversation also surrounding, well, what's the Harborside master plan gonna say? What's that gonna, how is the farmer's market gonna fit into the broader scope of Harborside development as well? With all that being said, we do also understand that there's some quote unquote patchwork work to do out there to, creature comforts and making sure that, when it rains or something, that vendors are protected and products are protected. So that's what this covers. It does not cover what I think all of us hope to be a true phase 2 of the farmer's market, a real enhancement of a downtown core attraction for producers, growers, crafters, that we can, not that we're not proud of it now, we're very proud of what the farmer's market has been able to create, but it is very much also a more polished event space or a polished space for these folks that have dedicated time to events.
We're going to spend $44,000 to do some of these improvements
So
this summer.
Sums it up, we've already spent the $10,000 to AEPA to do the design on this. The design plans were included in the packet, but the $34,000 is the approval to fix the immediate needs as outlined in the last several weeks to address some of those broader concerns. Also, keep in mind that this was approved. The $10,000 for engineering design was approved when?
November
I believe March.
March. Yeah. So as with every city project, it goes through engineering design, that takes some time, it goes out to bid, that takes some time, bids come back, and then we accept the bid. So that's the normal timeline that we've followed up until now. And that's the timeline that this is also fallen into.
So the winning bidder is going to go in and do $34,000 worth of work, just
Sure.
mostly remediation, I guess you could say this time.
Correct.
So is it primarily focused on repairing the leaks in the fan?
Correct. Matt can address that a little bit more, but that's the,
How is this gonna be done? Is this gonna be like a temporary patch, or is this gonna be long-term fix for the leaks, or?
We attempted a couple of patches during the initial renovation activities last year. They helped somewhat with the leaks, but certainly not to the point where it's acceptable to the market or to the city. So rather than taking another half measure, this scope of work includes a complete replacement of the ridge cap that goes down the length of the building. The bulk of the problem at this point is rain coming in into the ridge cap at the very peak of the roof and then dripping down the sides, and then it hits everything in the building. So rather than trying to put more sealant up there, we're simply going to strip the entire ridge cap off, put a new one on that is about twice the width to protect against that wind-driven rain, and also seal it tightly throughout the length of the building. And as part of that, to assist with some of the ventilation issues that the market has experienced, there's going to be 3 fans placed at different points in the building, all of about 750 cubic feet per minute, which is more than enough to adequately ventilate that space. And that should keep it comfortable, keep it dry for everybody down
What, are these gonna be on the floor, or?
there. No, they're going to be mounted to the roof. 2
Mounted.
mounted to the roof and 1 on the back wall.
Yeah, just to clarify, give a little bit of history on this. I know, and I'm sure Matt will back me up on this. Originally, we thought we were gonna have a little bit more money out of the grant to do more down there, and we didn't, we came up a little short. And this was our intention to chip away at this as these problems develop, like the mayor said, with You know, we found out some of the shortcomings in the building that we would address them, and I'm glad to see that we're doing.
I look forward to the time when we can move to the next phase, which would be to expand the farmer's market and make perhaps a pavilion down there attached to that building.
And the fourth advisory committee of the harbor side is meeting, I believe sometime next week. There's a scheduled date in there somewhere, which will present one of the final draft designs for the harbor side as part of the harbor side master plan. That does highlight the farmers market and the essential use of the market as a gathering space. And it will be nice to take a look at that recommendation, that recommended master plan, and start to really invest in our harbor side. Well, it's one of the most valuable parcels of property the city of Plattsburgh has. One, you know, central to our waterfront and waterfront development, and to continue to really invest in the harbor side master plan, the farmers market, trail systems. Even the water resource recovery facility is crucial for that area. So I too am looking forward to having some path forward to investing more into the farmers market and other recreation opportunities in that area.
I think Matt's memo did a very good job of describing what could happen down there in terms of things like paving, and restroom facilities, and all sorts of things that could be added. I don't see why we don't go for that. You know, make that facility the best one in the region.
It's the opportunity. It really is.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is.
Two things. So are windows included in this too? Because I understand windows are a problem there too for ventilation.
So in this scope, there's no work contemplated for the windows. We expect that the addition of the wall and ceiling fans will mitigate the ventilation issues far more than attaching new windows that might be able to open and close. Certainly not to say that at some point in the future, for purposes of aesthetics, we can consider new windows, since those are part of the original building.
Okay, just for like cross ventilation and everything. Okay, and so we're voting on this tonight to put it on the agenda for
Correct.
our next council meeting. So after we vote on it, should it pass, when can the work get started?
Based on the contractor that is outlining this expense, Monday.
Perfect, okay.
Yep. And it's also been coordinated with them that any work that they do during the week should be wrapped up or at a point where the market can continue to operate if they are complete in that
Okay.
time frame. But I don't know what their time frame for completion is, so.
About 30 days for the
Okay.
contract.
So they'll be there for 30 days, but again, it's the opportunity to ensure that the market cannot continue to operate.
Very good, and let's hope for good weather this Saturday.
Any further discussion on this item? Roll call.
Counselor Canales?
Yes.
Counselor Kelly?
Yes.
Counselor Gibbs?
Yes.
Counselor Talon?
Yes.
Counselor Moore?
Yes,
Carried. 4.1, discussion of 2022 year-to-date report. That report has been.
We skipped one?
You skipped
Oh,
two.
I'm sorry. Draft resolution approval of artwork displays and rules for. What am I doing? Okay, sorry. Draft resolution, sorry about that. Bless you. Draft resolution award of low bid for farmers market improvements. Motion, Councilor Good, second by Councilor Canales. Pretty much discussed all of it. This is the awarding of the bid for the $34,000 contract. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Draft resolution approval of artwork display renewals for Betty Dodo Art Department. Motion, Councilor Gibbs, second by Councilor Canales. Discussion? Just a point on this is a renewal of the artwork, the contracted artwork that's down there. Those are not permanent sculptures, not permanent installations. So we go back to the artist and they say, can we use your artwork for another year? We give them $1,000. That does come out of our downtown fund program for parking. It's already been allocated for this year's expectation that we're going to review that amount for more artwork. And then next year we'll look to cycle more artists into the.
Do you know if the artist will just keep the current installations or bring us new art?
They'll, right now, the plan is to keep the current installations.
Okay.
Hope we keep the flowers. I love the flowers.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. 4.1 discussion, 2022 year-to-date report. Standard monthly report provided to council, incomes, expenses, revenues generated in each individual fund. It outlines employee benefits as well as payrolls. You'll note that the overtime budgets for the most highly used overtime tracks at about 60 and 55% between police and fire respectively. Last week, as you could probably imagine, police incurred about $30,000, just under $30,000 of overtime, considering the circumstances warranted. But again, it goes back to understanding that mid-year, we try to come back and take a look at our financial situation across the organization, and then make some assessments on where we're running over, where we're running under, and make the appropriate adjustments. Pencil the appropriate adjustments until the end of the year when we make any bigger budget transfers as needed. So right now, looking pretty good, looking pretty healthy so far so good, and we'll continue that momentum and continue that trend. I will note that sales tax typically under budgeted, sales tax revenues are typically under budgeted. I think right now we're tracking just over 20% of what's budgeted. So we'll look at a bit of an increase come end of year as expected. But I think that when we budget for sales tax revenues, we typically budget conservatively, but we always end up, most of the time, end up in a surplus in that. So.
I see, sorry. I see in our Friday cash report, our debt service is doubled to $1 million. It was around 400,000. So it was around 400,000 a few months ago. So what is that attributed to exactly?
We received financial restructuring board funding that exceeds the debt service. We have to pay on an annual basis. So whenever we get funding that overlaps like that, it goes back into the debt service reserve. So it's used to offset future debt service payments. When we transfer it in there, we'll cover the debt service for the parking lot for the next 9 years to the level of like 70-some thousand. It will effectively cut it in half for the parking lot.
Okay.
And that was a project that we received not only the funding for, which we weren't sure whether we were going to get it or not. We've only been looking for those funds since 2016, and finally, 800,000 shows up, but we had already borrowed the money to be able to do the work on the own lot. So anyway, it's not going to provide that service for them.
Any further discussion on the year-to-date report or the cash report? 4.2 draft resolution adoption of the revised 5-year plan 2023 to 2028. Motion by Councilor Gibbs, second by Councilor Canales. Discussion on this is, it's, you look at it and you know, certainly the first reaction is looking at all the red numbers on the bottom. Part of the and again, same concern I shared with Councilor Moore and Councilor Kelly when we worked on this with Richard, was that this is a tool in the entire scope of how we manage city financials. It's not intended to be the one and only thing that we look at. It is a thing that we look at. We also look at projected incomes over certainly on average over the last 5 years, as well as what we anticipate to see over the next 5 years. This also includes a significant amount of debt service in the $100 million of capital projects that were approved by council in 2022. Whether those capital projects come to realization or not, which oftentimes they don't. Depends on priority of the council. And if there is available funding for those types of capital projects. The other things that we do account for is inflation, inflationary numbers that we take a look at industry-wise, as well as federal inflationary numbers and anticipation inflationary numbers. And those inflationary numbers are really applied primarily to a certain subset of our city's expenses. Those expenses that are associated with capital projects, construction costs, increases in payroll, increases in healthcare and other benefits. And it's not always applied across all of our expenses across the board. That's something that we made a bit of a clarification in this round. The property tax base increase, as you'll see in 2023, it'll increase as projected by our tax assessor at 7.23%. Because it's unknown after the fact, we kind of plugged in base increase of 3%. If you look at the average increase over even the last 5 years, we've increased a little bit more than 3%. So it's a fairly reasonable increase and conservative. You'll also note that in here, the property tax revenue matches that of the forecasted property tax base increase percentage-wise, but we don't increase the non-property tax payment. That stays flat. And as we have seen, that also increases on average about 12. I think last year was 16% increased over what was budgeted. But that is something that we left alone in this projection. So we would see that increase as well. Again, this is a tool. I don't want people to, I would hate for, understandably, it's something you look at and say, okay, let's be mindful of how we spend and let's be mindful of what capital projects we adopt. But again, this is not the I don't think anybody's going to look at 5 years from now and say, we just spent $4 million. Or even close to it.
It's not a budget. This is what you.
It's not a, yes.
So how do we arrive at these numbers then, by the time you get to 2027?
Yeah.
And we're in the negative?
So that goes back to, if you look at, sorry. That goes back to when you look at the $100 million of bonded projects and capital projects, we bond $100 million worth of projects. Those are the numbers that you will end up having spent over the next 5 years. And I think everybody here who's been in some type of municipal government understands that those projects are on the list. Whether they're realized or not is I don't want to say the flavor of the moment, but some of them are spent and funded by other sources. Some of them are spent and funded by bonded dollars. So when I look at this, I don't look at it, I certainly don't look at it like, okay, we're going to spend $100 million in capital projects out of the general fund over the next 5 years. It really is the potential for us to spend or to get into $4 million into the negative on the general fund. And general fund expenditures would be realized if we went ahead and bonded $100 million in projects.
Is that the only thing causing that, is bonding?
Primarily, yes, and then also the tax rate stays flat. The lack of increase in non-property tax revenues stays flat. We're pretty much honed in on the anticipated expenses, but if we're not mindful of how we're spending money over time, then yes, that will also contribute to that number. I think this council has been very good at maintaining a good balance of expenditures compared to the amount of revenues that have come in, as we saw over the last 2 fiscal years, with maintaining a very good expense load and how we spend money. And we've seen that over the last 2 years now, as well as finding opportunities to increase revenues and to offset expenses, especially when it comes to, say, like apartment fees and type of business that we provide in the city.
So the line here that says city tax levy increase since 2016. Sorry. Under 2023, it says 5.65%. Is that a proposed tax increase for the next budget
I'm
cycle?
sorry,
Where it says
2016.
scenario 1 and realistic expectations are exactly the same. So
Yeah.
on the column that says city tax levy increase since 2016,
Yes,
and you follow over to 2023 and it says 5.65%. Is this a suggestion that we raise the taxes by 5.65%, 8.82, 12.08, 15? And so what does that mean?
Those are just the increases that are happening because of the numbers that you see above in the second line that says that they're the property tax base increase. Because of the base increase, they're the increases in the revenue. There's no property tax rate increase put through the numbers at all.
So really, basically, this is the increases in assessed value.
it's the increases of the assessed value with the current tax rate, the current mill rate. Yeah, $11.37. If that rate stays at 0% increase, and the levy increases at 3% over the next several years, or 7% next year, then the levy will increase at 5.65%.
2, 12, 15, it's compounded at 3%. And the main part of the loss of 4.2 million is 3.7 million for accumulated debt service. So you're only looking at really $500,000 outside the debt service. That's part of the expenses versus the revenues. The debt service is the big piece of this. Forecast to be put in place based on the capital expenditures, 3.75% interest over a roughly 15-year period. And those numbers that you see on about the what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th line down, they accumulate to add to total debt service year over year over year. And once 2 lines down from that, how the debt service is being paid off based on the amortization of the existing debt.
I think one question we ask quite often is, how much is this capital project going to add to our, our payments? And you laid that out for us very nicely here, Mr. Marks. That's a great addition to this 5-year plan.
And once again, like the mayor says, provided we do, provided the issues
Right.
the way they are, provided this for 2 years. So, set the assumptions.
I also want to say that Mr. Marks did us a real favor by predicting the inflation very accurately. We were panicked when we first started this process because we said, well, inflation right now is running 9%. What's that going to do to our finances? And he pointed out correctly that many of the costs we have are fixed, or they change by a very small amount, such as payroll.
The debt service doesn't change with inflation. It's a fixed amount that, to put in place for debt is fixed. The healthcare assumption for 2023 is a high 10.2% based on actual assessment of where it's going to be. And then also during 2022, 3.1% increase over what we budgeted is expected to affect the current year. So that's where the 268,906 deficit comes from this year. Even though we budgeted no loss, no gain, a balanced budget. 130,000 is the additional debt service for our ban we have in place right now come this fall, plus the increase in healthcare expected because of changing prices. the actual. And the assumption for contract services for the year is at 6% inflation. But the employee payroll and benefits is 1.5 based on the current contract. So it's a combination of things that develop the increase in the expenses on the first line.
Is there any factoring in of, how can I say this, projecting what will happen with these numbers? Once the police department contract is settled. Because that's still unsettled. I mean, we know we're gonna back pay. I mean, has that been factored in here as any anticipation in any way?
We've got our contingency amount in there.
How much is that though, Richard?
391 was in this budget, and that's being escalated at 6% per year. How that will affect, covering the police department increases for the retroactive pay. So,
I think that would be an important thing to look at. Because we know that has to be taken care of. We know it's going to be a lot. And I really would like to see that actually, and how this affects the long-term numbers, so that it's as realistic as possible. So not just what's the health insurance percentage? Did you say 10% increase?
Health insurance in 2023 is 10%.
10%.
An additional 3% on top of what we budgeted this year, and it's in these numbers.
It's in these numbers.
And it's tracking pretty much, the way the actuary said, we're looking at, our healthcare being at about 50% right now, when it should be at 41, 42%. So it's tracking a little bit higher, and that's because they predicted the cost are going to go up.
Yeah.
So it's going to be even worse next year. The years after that, we left it at 6%. But still 6% against that number is a big increase, over year, and it compounds. So the tool is pretty good if you make sure you get the double counting out of it. We were double counting the capital expenditures last year to the point where we had a $14 million deficit by year 5. That was just, it was over exaggerated.
And again, as a tool, we continue to own, come back, visit, revise, own it. That's the goal of this. And again, just like the cash report, just like the monthly report, just like the transparency piece on ClearGov, just like this, it's a tool for us to manage our city finances in a responsible way.
I think what this points out, the debt service is the big,
Yeah.
not to track. Always has. Councilor Kelly said, to do this project, how much debt is it going to have?
Yeah. And that goes to Councilor Kelly's point, and what Richard just also highlighted, is that we don't have a debt service policy. We addressed this, something that we talked about last year, is that we don't have we're gonna no more capital projects bonded at $3 million annual debt service. We don't have anything like that. So we have to come back to this every single time and say, okay, how much money annually are we spending in debt service, or how much is covered? Because there could be money that is debt service, but it's backed by funds that are reimbursed or that are just sitting as a debt service reserve. So after you balance all the numbers, what is that bottom number that the city should be at? That's responsible and reasonable, that we're still borrowing money and we're paying it back, and we're not concerned with what happens if we spend $100 million in capital projects. We don't have that policy. Something again to come back to in the budget cycle, and create a real strong analysis with our bonding agents to come up with that policy or recommend that policy.
What's the rate right now for bonding?
3.75.
Is that locked in for us?
No,
No, so we could change by the end of the year based on inflation, and
yeah, you could go up or down.
it could go up or down.
Depends on the markets, depends on the size of the bond issue, depends on the number of years. The longer out you go, the higher you have to pay.
any kind of prediction that you're able to make on the rate based on inflation and what's happening in the economy?
Right now, from the bond agents, we got the rate of 3.75, so we would look at if we had to bond, say, 8 to 10 million this November, so 3.75%. I'm getting updates on that from Noah and this group.
How is now all of this affecting our Moody's rating? Our Moody's rating,
Oh, nothing's changed in that yet.
Okay.
We're due for review, and we've been talking with Noah about that, the mayor and I with Noah as to when. He advised that we didn't go asking for it. Wait until they were ready to come to us and say, hey, how's it going? Let's take a look at your numbers and let's revise your rating if it's due to be done. So I'm going to see that happen August, maybe. August.
Okay.
Last year you said March. This
Yeah.
year he says August, but we're on a positive outlook as well. We lean on those folks to really advocate for us, and they're looking at our financial situation and feel very positive that we'll see that.
Our financial results of 2021 should be in your favor. What's the surplus and fund balance is like $600. Good job.
Any further discussion on this? Make a motion to move this to the regular meeting for adoption. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Public comment? Okay. Any new business come for council? I'll make a motion to go into executive session to discuss matters of employment and promotion of a particular employee. Motion by Councilor Canal, second. Councilor Kelly, all in favor?
Aye.
Executive session.
Maury, you're here.
How you feeling? Yeah.
It went pretty fast. Pretty quick. Executive session.
Yeah. Can you get over there? Could you ask the mayor if I was supposed to be in that, or just ask if I should come in or not? If you wouldn't mind, thank you.
He'll be one.
Huh? Yeah.
He's on crutches.
I'll put down the other one.
Oh, did you open one? Yeah,
Chris did.
I was afraid I'd forget. I'm not tall enough to lock it, so.
Yeah, there's a couple that I can barely reach. One in the elevator room and lean over.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. Today, come out, want me to just, I'll be upstairs for a few minutes.
Just me.
And the audience, right? And the audience.
I wait.
Very nice.
Not everybody did, but I did.
Where'd that go?
I told them all to stay if you want to find them.
So take a motion to come back from executive session. No decision was made during that time. Motion by Councilor Canales, second by Councilor Gibbs. We're going back from executive session. No new business as requested before we went into executive session. Now take a motion to adjourn. Councilor Gibbs, second by Councilor Canales. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We're now adjourned. Thank you.